Pay attention to these two people in the body cam and interrogation footage. The young man slumped on the floor, his eyes blank, his hands trembling around a shotgun. That's David Olsen, just 18 years old. The woman lying motionless in the next room. The mother who once wiped his tears, who once promised to keep him safe, is Adriana Christina Olsen, 48 years old. Little did she know, these were the final moments of her life. A couple of minutes later, right there inside her Bellevue home, the son with the gun would change the trajectory of all their lives forever. At 12:30 a.m. on April 8, 2022, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office received a frantic 911 call from a quiet neighborhood on Princeton Drive in Belleview, Florida. The voice on the line trembled with panic. A neighbor, gasping for air between words, reported hearing multiple gunshots. She said she saw a woman collapsed in the living room, and she saw a man, not fleeing, not screaming, not even trying to run. He just sat down, laid the gun beside him, and waited. Police raced toward the address, lights cutting through the stillness of that suburban street. When they arrived, they stepped over a gun, broken pieces of furniture, and a family shattered, a father on his knees, a son in the center of the storm. But the manhunt they expected never came. No running suspect, no barricade, no standoff. What they found waiting for them was something much more unsettling. Adriana Christina Olsen, by all outward measures, was a devoted mother and wife. She worked hard, cared deeply, and maintained the kind of quiet family life people call normal. She was the neighbor who waved from the driveway, the mom who volunteered at local events, the one people thought had it all together. But beneath that calm domestic facade, there were fractures. Her marriage had grown strained. Her husband worked out of town often, days, sometimes nights, leaving her and David alone at home. And David was struggling. He wasn't the carefree teenager everyone imagined. He had been diagnosed with mood disorders, obsessive-compulsive traits, and symptoms of psychosis. For years, the Olsens tried to hold the pieces together. Doctor visits, therapy, medication adjustments. But slowly, quietly, David's world began to spiral inward. He was a boy whose own mind whispered danger, even when the world around him felt safe. At some point, the piece they couldn't hold together anymore was David himself. That night, according to detectives' notes, Adriana called her husband. Her voice was shaky, worried. She said David was talking about a gun, something about protection, something she didn't understand but feared. Her husband told her he'd come home right away, but by the time he did, it was too late. When deputies entered the house, they found David sitting cross-legged on the floor, the shotgun beside him. He wasn't crying. He wasn't yelling. He just stared into nothing. A hollow quiet that terrified even the officers who'd seen everything before. The father stood nearby, shaking, unable to comprehend the scene before him. According to his statement, his wife had called moments earlier, panicked. He'd driven home fast. He'd found David with the gun. He'd tried to take it away. And then the gun went off. When the blast echoed through that small home, the mother fell. The father screamed. And the son's world, everything he'd ever known, fractured in an instant. Adriana Christina Olsen was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too great. She was pronounced dead not long after arrival. A mother lost, a son destroyed, a father forever haunted. For the officers on scene, this wasn't the kind of crime they could categorize easily. There was no clear villain, no stranger breaking in, no hatred, just heartbreak. The reports read simply, son pointed gun at mother, shot fired, the mother injured, later pronounced deceased. But behind those sterile words was a collapse of years, of family effort, of warnings unheeded, of pain unseen. As dawn broke over Bellevue that morning, the quiet street was lined with flashing lights and neighbors whispering in disbelief. To them, the Olsens had always seemed like good people. No drugs, no fights, just a family that kept to themselves. But behind those closed doors, something darker had been unfolding. Not evil, not deliberate, but tragic. A storm brewing inside an 18-year-old's mind. David Olsen wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a kid, confused, isolated, scared of his own thoughts. His mother was the one person who'd never given up on him. She'd begged for help. She'd worried aloud to friends and family. She'd even confided that she sometimes didn't feel safe, not because she thought her son wanted to hurt her, but because she could see the fear in his eyes. He was losing touch with reality, and she was losing the ability to reach him. Investigators later said there were no signs of a struggle, no long fight, no premeditation. Just a moment, flash, a single decision that can't be undone. When the interrogation footage begins, David sits in a small room. The metal chair creaks as he shifts his weight. His eyes are blank, unfocused, as though he's somewhere far away. He tells detectives he remembers holding the gun. He remembers his mother screaming his name, and then nothing. He says he doesn't know why he pulled the trigger. And maybe that's the most chilling part of all. The investigation moved quickly. Police collected the weapon, photos, and witness statements. Forensic teams processed the scene, the splintered wood, the blood spatter, the trail that led to the living room. But behind the evidence and reports lay an unbearable truth. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a home, a place once filled with laughter, dinners, and the sound of a mother calling her son to bed. Now only silence. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're moved by this story, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Secrets. It helps us bring you more in-depth stories like this. Real lives, real heartbreaks, and the truths that often go unheard. In the weeks after the shooting, David Olsen was charged with second-degree murder. But as the case unfolded, prosecutors, and even the court, began to see that this wasn't a simple act of malice. It was the convergence of untreated mental illness, emotional exhaustion, and the easy access to a deadly weapon. His defense attorney described him as a troubled young man, someone who'd spent years battling his mind. He wasn't violent before. He wasn't criminal. He was broken. And when you look at that footage, the blank stare, the quiet compliance, you don't see rage. You see ruin. Adriana's husband, David's father, would later tell investigators that he'd bought the gun for home protection. He never imagined it would be turned inward, toward the very heart of their family. A gun meant for safety became the weapon that destroyed their safety forever. As weeks turned into months, David's mental state remained unstable. He struggled in custody. His interviews showed detachment, confusion, and deep guilt. He said repeatedly, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." And maybe in a tragic sense that was true. But intention doesn't bring a mother back. By early 2023, David's legal team reached an agreement. In May 2023, he pleaded no contest to manslaughter. The charge was reduced, but the pain, the loss remained just as heavy. The courtroom was quiet when the judge delivered the sentence. 10 years in state prison, followed by community control and probation. Justice, in the eyes of the law, was served. But emotionally, no sentence could repair what had been broken. The verdict marked the end of the legal story, but not the emotional one. Because for families like the Olsens, grief doesn't end in court. It lingers, in empty rooms, in unspoken apologies, in the haunting echo of what once was. If you've been affected by this story, or if you believe in shedding light on hidden tragedies, subscribe to True Crime Secrets. When the trial ended, the cameras left, and the courtroom emptied. What remained of the Olsen family wasn't closure, it was silence. The kind that fills a house once alive with conversation, now heavy, haunted. A husband without his wife, a father without his son, and a mother's presence, only in photographs and memories. Because what happened that April night in 2022 wasn't just a crime. It was a collapse, a moment where love, fear, and mental illness collided, and everything fell apart. Neighbors on Princeton Drive still remember the flashing lights. They still remember the sound of sirens that pierced the stillness of their quiet Florida street. Some say they can't walk past that house without feeling a chill, knowing that behind those walls, a mother's love met an unimaginable end. Others remember Adriana differently, as kind, warm, always smiling through the exhaustion that motherhood and worry bring. She loved David fiercely, even when she didn't understand him, even when his mind turned on itself. Those who knew David describe him as quiet, polite, but withdrawn. He struggled to fit in, to connect, and like many teenagers battling mental illness, he lived between worlds. The one people saw, and the one inside his head. He'd often stay up late, pacing, restless. He'd fixate on things, patterns, numbers, fears that made no sense to anyone else. Doctors called it obsessive-compulsive tendencies with psychotic features, a rare and complex mix. To Adriana, it was her son, trapped in a storm he couldn't describe, and like so many parents, she tried to help him fight it with love alone. The gun that ended her life wasn't purchased with malice. It was bought for protection, a precaution in a world that often feels unsafe. But what families rarely consider, what few truly understand, is that danger sometimes isn't outside the door. It's inside, in the places we feel safest. In the days after the shooting, investigators pieced together a timeline. They learned Adriana had phoned her husband late that night, worried, her voice breaking. She said David was pacing again, talking about the gun, about people coming for them. She asked him to hurry home, and when he did, he found his son holding the shotgun. There was yelling, panic, and then a single shot. 1 second that would echo for a lifetime. The sheriff's report later described the weapon as a 12-gauge shotgun kept for home safety, the kind that sits locked in many suburban homes across America. An object of reassurance, until the moment it becomes something else. Detectives combed through every inch of the house. They cataloged evidence, the shell casing, the broken picture frame, the phone Adriana had dropped. But there was no clear explanation written anywhere. No suicide note, no manifesto, just confusion. To the investigators, it wasn't evil that killed Adriana Olsen. It was instability, a fragile mind, untreated long enough for tragedy to slip through. In interviews, David's father said he blames himself. He'd been away for work so often, he said. He thought the gun was secure. He thought the boy was getting better. But guilt is a powerful thing, one that doesn't fade with time or verdicts. For him, every day since has been a kind of sentence too. One not written in law books, but carried in the weight of memory. When David was taken into custody, deputies described him as calm, eerily calm. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply said, "It just happened," as if the trigger had pulled itself. And maybe in his fractured mind, it felt that way. Maybe the voices he'd been hearing, the confusion he couldn't escape, blurred the line between fear and reality. That's the part no one can ever fully understand. During the court hearings in 2023, psychiatrists testified about David's condition. They spoke of years of instability, medication struggles, and the failure of systems meant to protect families like the Olsens. They said his actions were not premeditated, not driven by hatred, but by a break. A psychological collapse in a mind that had been signaling distress for too long. And yet, someone still had to pay the price. In June 2023, Judge Coleman delivered the sentence. 10 years in state prison, followed by community control and probation. A sentence balanced between punishment and recognition of mental illness. In the gallery, David's father sat silently, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look at his son. He didn't speak, because what words could there be? How do you forgive what you can't even fully understand? For Adriana's family, justice brought little comfort. Her friends spoke at her memorial, recalling her laughter, her kindness, her devotion to her family. They talked about how she believed every problem could be solved with enough love. But in the end, love alone wasn't enough to stop the spiral. David began serving his sentence at a state correctional facility in Florida. Inmates and guards alike described him as polite, quiet, and withdrawn, spending most of his time in his cell, reading or sketching. When asked what he draws, he says, faces, mostly his mother's. There's something haunting in that, the idea that the one person he can never see again is the one he can't stop drawing. Stories like this leave us questioning everything we think we know about crime, punishment, and mental health. Because not every tragedy comes from hatred. Sometimes it comes from pain, from a sickness that no one can see until it's too late. The law calls it manslaughter, but to those who knew them, it felt more like a slow heartbreak that finally broke open. And so the questions linger. Could this have been prevented? If help had come sooner, if medication, therapy, or intervention had reached David before the breaking point, would Adriana still be alive? We'll never know, but we do know this. There are families right now, across countless small towns and quiet suburbs, fighting the same invisible battles. David Olsen will one day walk free again. He'll be around 28 when his sentence ends. The world he returns to will be different, older, quieter, perhaps more forgiving. But the burden he carries won't disappear with freedom. Every day that passes, every sunrise behind those prison walls, reminds him of one thing: that the person who loved him most is gone, and he was the one who took her away. As for Adriana, she's remembered not as a victim, but as a mother who loved beyond measure. Her friends keep her photo framed, her name spoken. Her story now lives not only in court records, but in conversations about awareness, compassion, and the desperate need to take mental health seriously. Because sometimes the warning signs aren't loud, they're whispered, and if we don't listen, the consequences can echo forever. The Olsen case reminds us that family tragedy isn't just a headline. It's a mirror, one showing how fragile life can be, how quickly love can turn to loss, and how the systems meant to protect us often arrive too late. The gun that night didn't just take a life, it took a future. It tore through generations, memories, and the illusion of safety that so many cling to. And what remains is grief, and the haunting truth that sometimes justice can only go so far. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and think about the hidden struggles people face behind closed doors, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Secrets, because stories like this aren't just about crime. They're about people, about warning signs, second chances, and the fragile threads that tie families together until one moment they snap. In memory of Adriana Christina Olsen, 1974 to 2022, if you or someone you love is struggling with mental health issues, please reach out for help. You are not alone.